New York did not grow upward at first. It grew slowly, pressed against the ground, surrounded by water, wind, and doubt. The first buildings that watched New York grow were not proud. They were cautious. They were built for survival, not for beauty. They stood low and heavy, close to the earth. They were shaped by fear of fire, fear of attack, and fear of loss. These early structures saw the city take its first unsure steps toward becoming something larger than its founders planned. The story begins in the early 17th century when the Dutch West India Company planted a trading post at the southern tip of Manhattan. The place was called New Amsterdam. It was not meant to become a great city. It was meant to make money. The earliest buildings were made of wood. Timber was easy to find. Wood was quick to shape. But wood burned fast. Fires spread without mercy. Whole blocks vanished in hours. Each fire left behind ruin and memory. The buildings that survived these fires became lessons carved into the minds of builders and lawmakers. Fort Amsterdam stood near what is now Battery Park. It was built of earth and timber. It watched the harbor more than the land. Ships came and went, trade flowed in small amounts. The fort did not protect the settlers from fire, hunger, or sickness. It only guarded against enemies that rarely came. Around the fort grew homes, warehouses, taverns, and shops. These buildings were small. Roofs were steep. Windows were narrow. Streets were uneven and muddy. There was no grand plan. Each structure rose where it could. One of the earliest lasting buildings was the Stadhuis. It served as city hall and tavern. It stood near today's Pearl Street. It was rebuilt more than once. Fires damaged it, time changed it, but for years it watched arguments, laws, and daily trade. It saw power shift from Dutch to English hands in 1664. When New Amsterdam became New York, the building remained. The name changed. The struggles did not. The English brought new rules. They pushed for brick and stone. Fires forced their hand. In 1666, a major fire destroyed many wooden homes. After that, laws encouraged brick construction. This choice shaped the city's future. Brick buildings stood longer. They demanded skill. They demanded money. Not everyone could afford them. Trinity Church rose in 1698 near the southern edge of the settlement, close to the water that defined New York's life. It was built under a royal charter granted by King William III. The church stood on land given by the crown. This fact mattered. It tied the building to power, loyalty, and authority from the start. It was not the first church in New York. Dutch settlers had built earlier houses of worship during the New Amsterdam period. Yet Trinity became the most watched. Its location gave it that role. Ships entering the harbor passed near its grounds. Sailors saw its steeple before they saw most homes. For many, it was the first solid sign of the city. The building itself was modest by later standards. It was built of stone, not wood. This choice reflected caution. Fires had already scarred the young city. Stone suggested permanence. It suggested order. The church stood as a signal that New York intended to last. Trinity Church also held land. Over time, this land became valuable. Even in its early years, the church's presence shaped development around it. Roads adjusted to its boundaries. Homes clustered nearby. Burials filled its yard. The dead rested close to trade and tide. When the American Revolution reached New York, the city changed hands. British forces occupied it in 1776. That same year, disaster struck. In September 1776, a fire broke out near Whitehall Slip. Strong winds pushed flames northward. The fire burned out of control. Nearly 1/4 of the city was destroyed. Homes vanished, shops collapsed, churches burned. Trinity Church was consumed by the fire. Its stone walls cracked, its roof collapsed, its interior was lost. The building that had watched the harbor for decades fell in hours. No clear cause was ever proven. British leaders accused American patriots of sabotage. Some witnesses blamed careless soldiers. Others pointed to chance. Records conflict. Testimony fades. The truth never settled. The city lay damaged and divided. Many residents fled. Others lived among ruins. British troops used surviving buildings for quarters and storage. Order returned slowly. When rebuilding began, lessons lingered. Wood no longer felt safe. Brick and stone gained favor. Builders reused foundations when possible. Streets shifted slightly as plots were redefined. The changes were small, but they mattered. Trinity Church was rebuilt after the war. A second structure rose on the same ground. It stood as proof that institutions could survive disaster. The church reclaimed its place near the harbor, watching once more as ships arrived and the city resumed its work. Fraunces Tavern opened in the early 18th century. It was a place of meeting and planning. It watched merchants argue and soldiers drink. During the American Revolution, it became important. George Washington used it as a meeting place. In December 1783, he said farewell to his officers there. The building stood silent as history passed through its rooms. It survived fires and demolition attempts later. Its survival was never guaranteed. Homes in the 18th century were close together. Shared walls saved heat. They also spread fire. Builders accepted the risk because land was scarce. Manhattan was narrow. Growth had nowhere to go but north. City Hall, completed in 1812, marked a quiet but firm turning point in New York's life. The building rose after nearly a decade of work, beginning in 1903. Its construction faced delays, cost disputes, and public criticism. From the start, it was meant to speak for authority and stability. The building used marble on its southern face and brownstone on the other sides. The marble came from quarries in Westchester County. This choice was deliberate. The front faced the city's future growth. The less costly stone faced land that few people noticed at the time. Builders did not expect the city to surround it so quickly. City Hall did not face the harbor. That decision broke with tradition. Earlier centers of power had looked toward ships and trade. This building turned its back to the water. It faced north. It faced streets that had not yet filled. This orientation showed confidence in expansion. The architects, Joseph-François Mangin and John Macomb Jr., designed the building in a restrained style. It avoided excess decoration. Its balance and symmetry reflected order. This mattered during a period of political uncertainty. The nation was young. Authority needed visible form. Inside, rooms were laid out for public use. Courts met there. City leaders worked there. Decisions affecting trade, property, and law passed through its halls. The building became a daily place of governance, not a distant symbol. The year of its completion carried weight. The War of 1812 began that same year. National tension ran high. New York stood exposed along the coast. City Hall stood inland, steady and active. It continued to function while conflict threatened trade. Around the building, the city shifted. Businesses followed government offices. Financial institutions moved closer. Streets filled with clerks, lawyers, and merchants. The area became a civic center rather than a port edge. Public reaction to City Hall changed over time. Early critics complained about cost and delay. Later generations praised its endurance. The building survived fires, expansion, and political change without losing its role. City Hall did not rise in height, it rose in meaning. It showed that New York was no longer guided only by ships and warehouses. Power now lived in records, laws, and finance. This building watched the city turn its gaze inland. It stood as proof that New York had begun to govern itself at scale, with permanence in mind. As the city grew north, row houses filled the streets. These buildings were narrow and tall by the standards of their time. They housed families, shops, and workers. Each row house watched daily life unfold. Children played on stoops, vendors called out. Horses passed close enough to touch. The challenge was space. The population grew fast. Immigration surged. Buildings strained to hold more people. Tenements rose. Early tenements were poorly built. They lacked light and air. Disease spread through them. Reformers documented these conditions. Jacob Riis used photography to show the truth. Buildings that held suffering could no longer hide it. The tenement laws of the 19th century forced changes. Windows were required. Air shafts were added. These changes saved lives. They also changed how buildings were designed. Architecture became tied to health and morality. While workers lived packed together, wealth took another form. Mansions arose along Lower Fifth Avenue. These buildings were statements. They used stone, iron, and imported materials. They watched parades and protests pass by. They stood apart from the crowded streets behind them. Cast iron buildings appeared in the mid-19th century. Soho became their home. These structures were strong and flexible. They allowed large windows. They supported new types of commerce. Factories, showrooms, and offices filled their floors. These buildings watched industry reshape the city. Then came the elevators. Then came steel frames. Together, they changed what a building could be. Stairs had once limited height. Steel removed that limit. Elevators removed fear of climbing. Floors above the 6th level gained value. Height stopped being waste. The Equitable Life Assurance Building, completed in 1870 at Lower Broadway, proved this change. It was not the tallest structure of its time by walls alone, but it was the first office building designed from the start to depend on passenger elevators. Without them, its upper floors would have sat empty. With them, every floor earned rent. The building rose near the center of finance. Its presence altered the street. Sunlight faded. Shadows stretched across nearby blocks. Businesses nearby complained. Others rushed to copy the model. City leaders noticed the effect. Newspapers debated it. Height had become a force that reached beyond property lines. Profit followed height. So did concern. Streets grew darker. Air felt trapped. The city had gained power, but it had not yet learned how to shape it. 30 decades later, the Flatiron Building rose at the meeting point of Broadway and Fifth Avenue. The plot was narrow and sharp. Many doubted it could hold a tower. The land dictated the form. The building followed. Completed in 1902, the Flatiron stood firm despite early fears. Its steel frame carried the load. Its limestone and terracotta skin concealed modern strength. Wind rushed around its edges. Gusts moved clothing. Crowds gathered out of curiosity. Police dispersed them. Order returned. The building remained. The Flatiron proved a clear lesson. Value did not require perfect land. It required confidence and structure. What once seemed unusable became prized. As buildings rose higher, danger rose with them. Fire moved upward fast. Older fire ladders could not reach. Trapped workers had few options. Deaths occurred. Investigations followed. Public anger grew. Rules changed. Steel frames were protected with fire-resistant material. Stairwells were enclosed. Fire escapes improved. Elevators gained safety systems. Inspections became routine. Each tragedy reshaped law. Foundations deepened as well. Caissons sank into bedrock. Engineers studied soil. Failure was no longer acceptable. Tall buildings demanded precision. Then came Grand Central Terminal. Opened in 1913, it replaced two earlier stations on the same site. Steam trains had choked the area with smoke. Accidents had killed pedestrians. Public pressure forced change. Railroads responded by building below ground. Grand Central was designed to manage people first. Trains were hidden. Space was opened. The main concourse absorbed crowds without panic. Movement felt controlled. Light entered through high windows. Sound spread without chaos. The terminal did not rise tall. Its power stretched wide. It shaped land use around it. Offices rose nearby. Hotels followed. Streets filled with traffic and trade. Midtown gained purpose. Grand Central pulled the city north. It redirected growth away from the harbor. Business followed access. Access followed rails. The building watched millions arrive and leave. Soldiers departed. Workers commuted. Families reunited. The terminal became a daily crossing point for the city's life. The building was designed by the firm McKim, Mead & White. The architects studied classical buildings of ancient Rome. They did not copy them directly. They studied proportion, order, and scale. The result felt familiar without repetition. The station used steel hidden behind stone. Its main waiting room rose high. Sunlight entered through a vast glass roof. The space felt open and calm. Travelers moved without crowding. Sound carried softly. The building respected the human pace. Massive columns lined the exterior. They faced the street with strength and clarity. Inside, long corridors guided movement with ease. The station did not rush people. It welcomed them. For many visitors, Pennsylvania Station was their first experience of New York. The building set expectations. It suggested care, order, and confidence. It showed that public space could serve dignity as well as function. The station handled great volume. Trains arrived below street level. Tracks were hidden. The city continued above. This design reduced smoke and danger. It reflected lessons learned from earlier rail disasters. At the time of its opening, Pennsylvania Station stood as one of the largest public buildings in the city. It represented cooperation between private power and public need. Its success influenced later civic projects. By the early 20th century, New York had mastered vertical growth. Steel frames rose with speed. Elevators worked reliably. Towers reshaped streets. Yet this success created new strain. Tall buildings blocked light. Streets darkened. Airflow suffered. Complaints reached city leaders. Studies followed. The city faced a choice between unchecked height and shared space. In 1916, New York adopted its first comprehensive zoning law. This law did not limit height directly. It shaped form. Buildings had to step back as they rose. Upper floors withdrew from the street edge. Light and air returned below. These setbacks changed the skyline. Towers gained layered forms. Streets opened visually. Shadows shortened. The city felt less pressed. The law balanced growth with care. It allowed profit without total loss of comfort. It shaped nearly every major building that followed. By this point, New York could build high and wide with control. It had rules. It had experience. It had learned to breathe between walls. The city stood ready for its next test, unaware of how sharply loss would soon teach restraint. The buildings that watched New York grow did not speak. They did not need to. Their scars were visible. Fires left marks. Rebuilds left seams. Laws left shapes. Each structure held memory, not as stories, but as choices made under pressure. Each wall showed what people feared and what they hoped. By the late 19th century, the city faced a clear problem. Growth pressed hard against narrow streets. Businesses wanted space near banks, ports, and rail lines. Moving north helped, but it did not solve everything. The answer rose straight up. The buildings that watched this change did not arrive by chance. They were shaped by new tools, new rules, and fierce competition. Height became a sign of control. A taller building meant more offices meant more rent meant influence. The early tall buildings did not trust stone alone. Stone was heavy. Walls grew thick as buildings rose. This wasted space. Steel changed everything. Steel frames carried weight inside the structure. Walls became skins. Windows grew larger. Light entered workspaces. The home insurance building in Chicago is often named as the first true skyscraper, but New York refined the idea. The city pushed the concept further. It demanded height and profit together. The Tribune Building rose in 1875 on Park Row near City Hall. It was built for the New York Tribune newspaper. At 10 stories, it stood higher than most buildings in the city. That height drew attention. People stopped to look up. Many had never worked so far above the street. Elevators made this height possible. Before them, workers avoided upper floors. Climbing stairs wasted time and strength. With elevators, height became useful. Offices above the street filled quickly. Speed replaced strain. Time gained value. The building also carried a clock tower. Its face could be seen from far away. Time became public. News and time shared the same walls. The structure showed that information now moved fast and demanded presence. Soon after, the Western Union Telegraph Building rose nearby, completed in the same year. It stood on Day Street in Lower Manhattan. Its frame used iron and early steel elements. This approach reduced wall thickness and increased interior space. The building supported new weight without relying on stone alone. Steel wires filled the structure. Messages entered and left at constant pace. Information crossed oceans in minutes. Business no longer waited for ships. Decisions moved faster than bodies. The building proved that distance had lost its hold on power. Lower Manhattan changed quickly. Blocks filled with tall offices. Narrow streets felt tighter. Walls rose close together. Sunlight faded earlier in the day. Banks led this rise. Financial firms needed proximity. They valued speed and trust. Height became a signal of strength. Tall buildings suggested security and reach. The Manhattan Life Insurance Building completed this message in the 1980s. Its tower rose above Broadway. For a time, it stood as the tallest structure in the city. Its height was deliberate. It told competitors and clients that the company stood above rivals. The tower pierced the skyline. Its presence could be seen from the harbor. Finance had claimed the horizon. Yet problems followed growth. Tall buildings cast long shadows. Streets darkened. Air movement slowed. Shops lost foot traffic. Tenants complained of gloom and crowding. The challenge reached beyond engineering. It became social and legal. Property owners argued over rights. Neighbors demanded limits. City leaders faced pressure from business and public alike. Debate filled newspapers and council rooms. No clear answer existed yet. The city had built upward faster than it had learned how to live beneath that height. The buildings stood firm. The streets below waited for relief. Change was coming, shaped by law rather than steel. In response, the city passed its first zoning law in 1916. This law changed the shape of buildings forever. Towers had to step back as they rose. Light and air were protected by law. This compromise allowed growth without total darkness. The buildings built after this law showed restraint shaped by rule. They rose in tiers. They respected streets below. This rule created the classic New York skyline. One of the first major buildings shaped by zoning was the Equitable Building, completed in 1915. It rose straight up before the law took effect. It blocked sunlight across many blocks. The public reaction was strong. That reaction helped push zoning forward. Midtown soon became the new stage. Rail terminals pulled activity north. Grand Central Terminal anchored the area. Offices followed. Hotels followed. Towers rose around them. The Woolworth Building opened in 1913 at 233 Broadway. It immediately became the tallest building in the world, standing 792 feet tall. Its height was deliberate. Frank W. Woolworth, the founder of the Woolworth retail chain, financed the building entirely with his own money. That fact spread quickly through newspapers and business circles. It signaled both personal wealth and the power of retail commerce. The building's steel frame carried the weight. Its exterior was clad in terracotta designed to resemble stone. This choice suggested permanence and tradition, reassuring clients and passers-by that progress could respect history. Inside, modern systems dominated. Elevators moved efficiently, allowing workers to reach the upper floors with ease. Electrical systems powered offices and lights. Plumbing, ventilation, and heating followed the latest designs. The building combined tradition on the outside with modern life within. The city watched its construction closely. Crowds gathered on the streets to observe each floor rising. Newspapers published photos of workmen high above the city. The building cast shadows over City Hall Park, a visual reminder of vertical ambition. People spoke of its presence as if the building itself were aware of its dominance. The race for height intensified immediately after Woolworth. Each new skyscraper aimed to surpass the last. Engineers tested limits carefully. Foundations grew deeper. Caissons were sunk into Manhattan's bedrock to support unprecedented loads. Laborers worked under dangerous conditions, often in compressed air or at dizzying heights. Accidents occurred. Lives were lost. Safety improved slowly, guided by lessons learned on these projects. In 1909, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company began planning a tower that would claim visibility across the city. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Tower, completed in 1909 at 1 Madison Avenue, stood 700 feet tall. Its massive clock faces were visible for blocks. The clock became a symbol of order and reliability. From a distance, the tower suggested that the company controlled time itself. Employees and visitors could always measure hours beneath its presence. The tower's location near Madison Square gave it strategic influence. Crowds passed daily under its shadow. Streets and traffic seemed organized by its silent presence. The tower's form and function reflected a dual purpose: to serve business and to command attention. Both the Woolworth Building and the Metropolitan Life Tower exemplified the ambition of early 20th century New York. Height became an assertion of financial and social power. Buildings no longer simply held offices, they displayed authority. The city learned that skyline could communicate status, and each new project challenged engineers, architects, and workers to push limits further. By observing these structures, New Yorkers began to measure success vertically. The city's streets and squares felt smaller, but its skyline spoke loudly. Competition for height and prominence reshaped priorities, designs, and the daily experience of the urban landscape. As buildings grew, fire safety became critical. Past fires had taught harsh lessons. Steel frames resisted collapse. Fireproof materials became standard. Stairwells were enclosed. Fire drills became routine. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911 did not happen in a skyscraper of record height, but it changed everything. The building had locked exits. Workers died in great numbers. Public outrage forced reform. Building codes improved. Safety entered design. Each new rule changed how buildings rose. Owners resisted costs, reformers pressed harder. The result was safer workspaces and longer-lasting structures. The Chrysler Building rose during the late 1920s, a period defined by ambition and competition. Walter P. Chrysler, the automobile industrialist, financed the project. Its construction involved secrecy. Engineers and architects worked quietly to hide the final design details. The building's steel spire was assembled within the structure itself, concealed from public view. At the last moment, it was hoisted to the top. The maneuver allowed the Chrysler Building to briefly claim the title of the tallest building in the world, surpassing rivals by a few feet before being overtaken by the Empire State Building. The design of the Chrysler Building celebrated the industrial age. Its crown included stainless steel cladding arranged in triangular patterns. The ornamentation drew inspiration from machines, cars, and aviation, reflecting the technological progress of the era. Gargoyles resembling Chrysler hood ornaments adorned the corners. The building embodied speed, modernity, and the optimism of the 1920s, signaling that industry and architecture could rise together. Soon after, the Empire State Building began construction. Completed in 1931, it rose at extraordinary speed. Floors were completed in days. Thousands of workers labored on steel frames high above the streets. The Empire State Building reached 1,250 feet at its roof, surpassing all predecessors. Its observation deck became a public attraction. Tourists and locals alike could look out over the entire city, experiencing height not as isolation but as participation. The building transformed vertical space into shared experience. Both towers communicated power beyond their use as offices. They were symbols. They displayed financial, industrial, and architectural dominance. Height became language. Every foot added sent a message about ambition, skill, and innovation. New York's skyline was no longer only practical, it was expressive. Citizens, visitors, and competitors understood the story these buildings told, that New York led the nation in commerce, technology, and daring design. The city below continued to move and grow. Streets bustled with traffic. Elevators carried workers to upper floors. The buildings themselves became landmarks in daily life, watched and watched back. Their presence reminded the city that ambition had shape and that every tower was both a tool and a statement. In steel and stone, New York declared itself a city that measured power not by land alone, but by how far it could rise. Yet, controversy followed. Critics warned of excess. Some feared that the city chased height without care. Others argued that tall buildings drained life from streets. Shadows remained a concern. Traffic increased, infrastructure strained. Still, the city continued upward. Each tower paid for itself through rent. That fact silenced many critics. Offices replaced workshops. Clerks replaced craftsmen. Paper replaced goods. The city shifted from making things to managing them. Immigrants filled these buildings as workers. They typed, filed, counted, and planned. Their labor powered growth. Their names rarely appeared in records. The buildings held their hours and effort without judgment. At street level, life continued. Vendors sold food. Newspapers shouted headlines. Construction noise filled the air. Above, glass reflected clouds. The city became layered. By the early 20th century, the city had learned how to build high and fast. Steel frames, elevators, and zoning laws had solved many problems. Yet a new challenge appeared. As new towers rose, older buildings stood in their way. These older structures had history, but history did not pay rent. Lower Manhattan felt this pressure first. Financial firms wanted larger floor plates. Old buildings with thick walls and small rooms could not compete. Many were torn down without ceremony. Records show little protest at first. Progress carried pride. Trinity Church survived because it owned land and held influence. Its graveyard slowed development around it. Tall buildings rose nearby, but the church remained. It stood small beside giants. It watched wealth tower above faith. Wall Street changed shape. Early banks had been built to show trust through stone and columns. By the 1920s, trust was shown through size and speed. New bank buildings filled entire blocks. Old facades disappeared. In Midtown, the story repeated. Grand Central Terminal anchored growth, But nearby homes and small hotels vanished. Blocks were cleared. Streets widened. The terminal itself faced pressure. Railroads struggled financially. Air rights became valuable. The idea of building above tracks reshaped planning. The Commodore Hotel rose next to Grand Central. Offices followed. The area transformed in a short span of years. Older structures left quietly. Pennsylvania Station stood as a warning that few recognized at the time. Completed in 1910, it was one of the city's most ambitious public buildings. Its vast interior space welcomed travelers with light and order. It showed care for the human experience. Yet it cost much to maintain. Rail travel declined. Revenue fell. The building became vulnerable. Its value was measured against land, not meaning. This truth waited for later decades, but the pressure had already begun. Row houses faced similar threats. Wealth moved north. Old neighborhoods shifted. Some homes became boarding houses. Others fell into disrepair. Landlords cut costs. Tenants crowded in. Buildings aged faster under strain. Reformers pushed back. Historical societies formed. Architects spoke publicly. They argued that buildings carried memory. They warned that once lost, these structures could not return. But laws offered little protection. Preservation had no firm ground yet. Property rights ruled. Cast iron buildings in Soho survived by accident. Industry moved out. Fashion moved in. Artists rented cheap space. The buildings adapted. Their strength allowed reuse. Their survival taught a lesson about flexibility. The challenge deepened during economic downturns. When money tightened, demolition slowed. Buildings survived not because they were loved, but because tearing them down cost too much. These pauses saved history by chance. Public opinion slowly shifted. People began to notice loss. Streets changed too fast. Familiar landmarks vanished. Memory felt fragile. City Hall remained, protected by function. Churches survived through community ties. Libraries held their ground. But many private buildings fell. The skyline grew cleaner. Older shapes disappeared. Uniform glass and steel replaced detail. Some praised the look. Others mourned the change. The buildings that remained became witnesses to absence. Empty lots told stories of what had stood there. Old photographs gained value. Memory moved to paper. By the end of this chapter, New York stood at a quiet crossroads. It had gained power and scale. It had lost pieces of itself. The city did not yet know how to balance growth with care. That lesson would come through loss sharp enough to wake public will. New York learned to protect its buildings only after it failed to do so. For many years, demolition felt normal. Old structures fell. New ones rose. The city accepted this cycle without pause. Progress seemed to demand it. Memory had no legal voice. That silence broke in the middle of the 20th century. Pennsylvania Station still stood then. Its great halls carried thousands each day. Sunlight entered through glass and steel. Travelers moved with purpose. The building worked as intended. Yet it sat on land worth more than its use could earn. Railroad companies struggled. Cars and planes took passengers away. Income fell. Maintenance costs rose. The station became a burden on paper, not in life. In 1963, demolition began. The news shocked many. Columns were cut apart. Stone fell piece by piece. What had taken years to build vanished quickly. People watched in disbelief. Newspapers printed images of ruin. Voices rose in protest, but too late. The replacement was functional. It was underground. It moved people. It did not inspire care. This loss changed something deep in the city. Citizens asked hard questions. Could usefulness alone decide a building's fate? Did public spaces have value beyond profit? Did history matter only when it earned rent? These questions reached City Hall. Leaders listened because anger spread across social lines. Architects spoke. Writers spoke. Ordinary commuters spoke. The building had belonged to everyone, and its loss felt personal. Out of this moment came resolve. In 1965, New York City passed the Landmarks Preservation Law. This law created the Landmarks Preservation Commission. For the first time, buildings could be protected for cultural and historical reasons. Owners could not destroy designated landmarks at will. This law faced resistance. Property owners feared limits, developers feared delay. Lawsuits followed. The city defended its choice. Grand Central Terminal soon became the next test. Plans emerged to build a tall tower above the terminal. The railroad needed money. Air rights offered hope. The proposal threatened the terminal's structure and presence. The Landmarks Commission denied the plan. The owners sued. The case reached the Supreme Court. In 1978, the court ruled in favor of the city. It declared that preservation served a public purpose. This decision secured the law's strength. It gave preservation lasting power. Grand Central remained intact. Its concourse continued to guide millions. Its survival proved that memory could stand against money. Other buildings gained protection. City Hall received care. Trinity Church stood firm. The Flatiron Building gained status. Cast iron structures in Soho earned recognition. Preservation did not stop growth. It shaped it. Developers learned to work around protected sites. New buildings rose nearby. Old ones found new uses. Offices became homes. Factories became studios. Buildings adapted rather than vanished. This balance was not perfect. Some landmarks were lost before protection arrived. Others were altered beyond repair. The law could not reverse time. Yet the city had changed its approach. It no longer saw old buildings as obstacles alone. They became assets of identity. Neighborhoods felt this shift. Residents fought for local landmarks. Community boards formed. Hearings filled with voices. Preservation became public work. The challenge moved from loss to choice. Which buildings mattered most? Whose history counted? These debates were not simple. Power still shaped outcomes. Working-class areas struggled to gain recognition. Grand buildings received attention first. Modest structures waited longer. This gap revealed social imbalance in memory. Not every adaptation succeeded. Some projects failed. Empty buildings waited years for purpose. Weather and neglect took tolls. Preservation did not guarantee life. Still, the city learned. By working within limits, architects found creativity. Old constraints inspired careful design. New systems hid behind old walls. Elevators slid into narrow shafts. Modern needs fit into historic frames. The buildings watched technology enter quietly. Wires ran unseen. Climate control settled in. Comfort increased without display. This period taught New York patience. Change did not need speed to succeed. It needed thought.